We are talking about the nutrition in dialysis patients, practical do's and don'ts, and this is meant for all the professionals who are dealing with patients on dialysis. Of course, this is a topic that is, something which is very dynamic because there is no one size fits all for the diet. When we talk about nutrition in CKD, we also understand that it is a progressive condition. It changes the metabolites, the electrolytes, the fluid balance, the nutritional status. It's very, very dynamic. And this nutrition therapy basically aims to slower the disease progression and manage complications and prevent malnutrition. And that's what we are looking for. So we try to use medical nutrition therapy as dietitians to improve the clinical outcomes of the patients on dialysis. We are aware that the five stages of kidney diseases and the diet in all the five stages of kidney diseases would vary a little bit from one to the other. So, whilst we say that from stage one, we do not really put in restrictions of diet for these patients, as the disease progresses, there are strategies which are used. So keto analogs are used, or low protein diet is used, and this goes on for years and years together. In fact, even the stage 3 is divided into two parts, like the stage 3A and stage 3B, where you have the EGFR ranging from around 59 to 30. So we know that this is a progressive disease, and the diet also changes as per the kind of diseases that the way it progresses. So when a patient is on keto analogs, we give low proteins. When the patient is not on keto analogs, we give moderate proteins. But today my talk is not on patients who are in the stage 1 to 4. Today's talk is based on patients who are in the stage 5 of kidney disease, that is kidney failure. And in a kidney failure patient, imagine this patient has been going through restrictive diets right from stage 2 to stage 4, and suddenly his diet has to change altogether. So there's a lot of counseling, there's a lot of nutrition interaction that is required with the patient to make him understand that where you were taking zero point 0.5 grams of proteins, now you have to take 1.5 grams of proteins, and the patient is not used to eating that much for so many years, and now suddenly he has to change his eating pattern. So we are going to stick to nutrition in the dialysis patients. We talk about the other progressions or the other stages on some other day. Today we will stick to just this, where dietary guidelines by stages, we say we focus on, in the stage 1 and 2, of course, we focus on blood pressure, Mediterranean lifestyle type of food. Again, as I just mentioned, that stage 3 and 4, the protein could vary from zero point 0.4 to zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8 grams, and in the stage 5, where we are going to manage the patient through a dialysis. Now, today, what I am going to talk about is, I'm not going to talk about nutritional assessments because that's a chapter by itself, and how to take the weight history or the dietary intake, how to look at the blood or the biochemical pattern of every patient. Hence, we have to look at that aspect of it as well. Coming to protein intake, I am not going to specify on the early stages of CKD, but talking about the dialysis patients, where we begin from 1 to 1.2 grams or even higher. Coming to the different type of dialysis in the patient group, so stable or dialyzed patients would be getting 1.2 per kg protein targets of their weight. However, this is of major concern to us because we are looking at the high biological value protein, where at least 50% of the proteins that are consumed are of a high baby protein. Now, here there are a lot of myths, or a lot of people who will tell the patients, okay, you have to stop eating non-vegetarian foods, or you should be eating only vegetarian foods, you should not be eating eggs, or you should not be eating this and that. And what happens is that the patients have already been made scared during their pre-dialysis phase, that they are really scared to eat foods that are of a high biological value protein. And as dietitians, we understand high biological value proteins do come from certain sources which need to be explained to the patient. Also, there are patients who are on a stable peritoneal dialysis, and this is like uh, patients who prefer don't want to go to the center for the dialysis, so they do the dialysis at home. These type of patients require even higher amount of proteins for these patients. Now, talking about the high biological value protein. So here we are talking about the high biological value protein. So often the question that comes to me is, doctor, how are we going to achieve that much amount of proteins in? Oh, that's good. The electricity is back. Okay. Oh, it's gone again. I think there's some bad work going on. So when I advise them, like if you look at the chart that is given here, if a person has to eat one egg, or just an egg white, which is about 3.5 grams of proteins, and I do encourage patients to even eat an whole egg. The egg yolk is no more an enemy. You can get around 6 grams of proteins with that. Milk, curd, paneer, all the dairy, these are again high biological value proteins. Also, lean meats from chicken, fish, certain dals will give you about 6 to 7 grams of proteins. Again, like a cup of it, if you take in raw weight, it's around 30 grams. Soya beans, soya tofu, soya chunks, these are also sources of proteins which are considered high biological value. Coming to how will you distribute the diet for a patient who say 60 kgs of weight, and if I say 1 to 1.2 grams of proteins, and they would require about 78 grams of proteins. So how difficult it is for us to actually reach that level of proteins for this patient. In fact, it is not difficult if you give a thought to it, and if you think how you want to feed your patient. So it is very simple, because if your patient is just going to eat poha for breakfast, chapati bhaji for lunch, evening snacks would be a kurmura khakra, and dinner would be say a pav bhaji, you're not going to get 78 grams of proteins, okay, in the diet I just told you. So whilst when you are planning a diet for a patient who's on dialysis, always try to aim and get your protein first. Okay, so when I give a distribution without using any additional ONS, or just from normal food, if the patient has a good appetite, I would say let them start their day with an egg and a cup of milk. During the mid morning, I will tell them to eat a potassium friendly fruit with a small portion of nuts. Remember, the potassium also can increase with both fruit and nuts. So, if the patient's potassium is high, at that time we need to exchange it with some other food here, rather than giving it from the fruit and nuts. But if the patient's potassium is in a good range, I will come to that in my future slides, then we will not need to then we can just go by what the saying. For lunch, you can give chicken if the patient is not a non-vegetarian and wants to eat like a tofu curry or a soya bean curry, or a kadhi, that is the dahi curry. We can give that along with rice or roti and sabzi. Evening can be, our evening snacks are generally, our mind goes to thinking of a carbohydrate fat combination, but start thinking proteins for these patients. So something where, like an egg white bhurji or a paneer tikki, if the patient is vegetarian, that can be added as snacks, and maybe a milk and curd. Now, here in this diet, what you need to remember, a few things. One is the amount of fluid that you're giving to the patient. See, there is fluid from milk twice a day. Then the amount of potassium that you're giving to the patient. So all this has to be calculated as per the patient's lab values, and therefore it has to be meticulously done, so that it does not, the diet should not interfere with the lab values. uh, Going ahead, the lab values, you what you need to see is proteins, calcium, phosphorus, uh, most of the time we do forget fiber, and I will tell you why. All this while, there are many patients who are unable to tolerate or unable to manage potassium. And most of the foods that are high in potassium are also high in fiber. So, when you are trying to restrict potassium, unconsciously or unknowingly, we are also restricting fiber. So, whilst we do that, we have to be very cautious that we have to include at least 25 to 35 grams of fiber in the entire day for this patient. How will you do that? You can just divide your fiber. If the patient is eating 4 meals per day, divide the fiber into 10 grams per meal. And that's when you will get your 30 to 40 grams of fiber. Uh, Coming on a very important aspect of kidney nutrition or dialysis nutrition is sodium. And this has always been a controversy, because when patients are in the pre dialysis phase, we tell them, you have to restrict salt and you have to restrict sodium, and we give them ways and means in which they can make their food tasty with the herbs, etc. However, they get a liberalization for proteins, but they are not allowed to be liberal with sodium or with salt. And I think that's a real concern, because the first question they will ask me is, can I eat bread? Can I eat biscuits? Can I eat bakery products? And unfortunately, the answer is no. It has to be very restricted, because we are restricting the sodium intake for many reasons. It increases thirst. Also, the fluid intake automatically increases. It increases the interdialect weight gain. And of course, we look at, there are people who are sodium sensitive for blood pressure, right? So those are the people who need a little extra sodium restriction. Some have say edema, or some have other cardiovascular diseases. We know that we have to look at the ejection fraction of these patients. So controlling sodium will definitely reduce thirst, have a better fluid control, and improve the cardiovascular stress. Uh, Now, we the first statement that goes by everybody, whether you're a dietitian or doctor, no papad pickle chutneys. So when I'm like talking to my patients, I give them recipes where they can make pickles at home, which are fresh. So they don't need to have store bought pickles which have got high sodium content. It's very simple. Very simple recipes are available even all over YouTube. Where you, if you want to make, say, a vegetable pickle, yeah, all you have to do is just take the vegetables. You can use many vegetables, whether it's papaya or carrots, or even garlic and ginger can be just salted, not salted, with herbed with haldi and some herbs, and with lime, or with a brine which is made of vinegar, or and mustard, can be used to make fresh pickles. Even if it is a homemade papad, if it is made in say an air fryer or in an oven, where you can control the salt that you're putting in, it makes a lot of difference. Yes, I know, I understand that all families cannot do it, but it's one way of doing it. So, but a store bought achar papad will have preserved salt, and it you will not know how much they have added in it. Similarly, when we talk about biscuits, so the question that I often get is, so I should never eat a biscuit at all ever in my life? So it's not like that. What I give them is one the first thing I would give them is a recipe which they can make cookies at home. But if you cannot make a cookie or you cannot make a biscuit at home, then you have to control the portions that you are eating, and you have to account for the sodium that is there inside it. So therefore, I also teach them to read the labels, and especially the labels that have got these low sodium namkeens or salt free namkeens. In fact, some of my good friends are into making namkeens, or like these snacky items which are friendly for kidney patients. And these recipes are available in books that they have released. And even at the Narmada Kidney Foundation, some of my friends and colleagues have done a lot of work in getting recipes of foods that are normally or which are usually available in the stores of with high sodium, but these are specialized recipes. Maybe I can also help you all with some. I'll send you all my contact details of my academy. We can work out something. Now, the other food that is the favorite of most people is Chinese food. You know, so they do question me that if I use a low sodium salt or a low sodium sauce or soya sauce, is that fine? So whilst we can use a low sodium sauces for making these Chinese foods, I would still suggest that it is very doubtful how much they are adding in the restaurants. So if you really want to enjoy a Chinese food without them adding MSG that you don't know how much of monosodium glutamate is added, I would suggest that you try to do it at home so you can again control what you are eating. um, what is a no is the preserved meats. Whilst we allow lean meats, we allow chicken, fish, eggs. We do not allow sausages, ham, nuggets that are very high in sodium, because they have sodium, the nitrite based sodiums, which are not only good where salt is concerned, but not also good for your overall health, for cancer prevention, etc. uh, the guidelines that is given by KDOK and the other Indian nephrology says that you shouldn't be eating more than 2000 or 2300 mg of sodium per day, which roughly is about 3/4 teaspoon of salt, but do not exceed like 1 teaspoon of salt. So how will you adjust with that? Actually, if you have home cooked foods which have normal salt in it, it will not exceed half a teaspoon per day. No sooner you add a food that is got something that's preserved, or something that's made with a preservative. Like, I'll just give you an example. You're making dhokla, okay, or you're making idli and you add a spoonful of eno to it, or a baking soda to it. It just changes the dynamics of the sodium, right? So although it may be a homemade item, if you have added the wrong ingredient, if you add ingredients that will just suddenly increase the sodium content of it. Then we come across foods that also are, salt substitutes. So when we say salt substitutes, it's the potassium based salts. We know that. Again, that is something that a person on dialysis shouldn't be doing, because we don't know what are the other things that are present in those salts. The favorite salt that people ask me these days is, can I use pink salt or Himalayan salt? In fact, recently I was just having a chat with one of the nutritionist who came and met me from Scotland, and she was like, uh, you know, you have the Himalayas, and you have the Himalayas, and why do you still use the other salt? So why do you use the other salts? So I said, like, we have iodine deficiency in India, and therefore we really need another type of a salt. So although Himalaya salt will be present, but you know still, where dialysis is concerned, we do not allow even the Himalayan pink salt, because salt is salt in terms of sodium chloride, and it may have some other trace minerals and elements which may be useful to other people. But when dialysis is concerned, it has to be the sodium based salt, so we have to look at the sodium. So there's a lot that I can speak on sodium. However, there are always ways and means in which we can use sodium in a very easy manner at home. So frankly, I also can teach people, and I teach people how to make breads without the baking soda, how to use yeast, and how to ferment, how to use natural ways in which you can use fermentation processes, where you also increase the probiotics, and you don't need artificial leavening agents to make your bread rise, or to make your dhokla rice, or the idlis rice. We have to go back to our own old traditional methods of cooking these foods. So whilst we take care of the sodium because of the reasons that we said, that sodium is important, and we do not exceed that 2000 mg salt for that patient. Definitely it helps to also control the interdialectic weight gain, which should be around 2 kgs or so. And especially the sodium is a trend, it's not a single value. At one time, the patient may have a normal sodium level, the other they may not have. And we have to remember one thing, that sodium, what you see in the lab values, the lab parameters of sodium, is not only sodium, it's related to the fluid intake, right? So it also depends upon whether there's how much of edema is there and how much of water retention is there. So you can't take it as the true value. So just stay within your limit of sodium chloride, and do not exceed that, is the best way to manage your sodium. So fluid allowances. Now, there was a patient who was questioning me about ice cream, and they said, "Can I eat ice cream?" So, whilst I was, these are like occasional foods, once in a while foods, because if you look at the ice cream pack also, and you look at the packs that are available in the market, they have a lot of sodium-based preservatives. So, whilst even if I want to allow them a homemade ice cream, or I want to allow them an ice cream once in a while, because like now they are on dialysis and they can, I usually tell them to consider it as water intake, because once you melt it down, whether it's jelly or ice cream, anything that is liquid at room temperature is considered water, and therefore they have to account for it when they are, managing their fluid. um, this is very very important, because it's very crucial that they whilst they're getting dialyzed, there's a lot of water that is removed, and the more the water they gain, the more difficult it is for them to be dry. So water per se needs to be measured, plus the number of tea, of coffee or liquids that they consume, like green tea, soups, liquid dals, buttermilk, jelly. All these are considered liquid at room temperature, and they should be accounted for in the fluid allowance very very strictly. Coming to the hero, that is the potassium. Now, potassium has always been a controversial topic to everybody. Patients get confused, because the first thing they go is they start Googling and checking out. Now it's the chat GPT, but believe me, even ChatGPT tells you what you want to hear. So you have to go to a genuine nutritionist to actually find out what is the potassium levels. In fact, I do recommend people to go to the IFCT, where they'll get the latest on the potassium levels, because it changes, right? It changes with the soil, with so many things. So serum potassium levels is mainly restricted if there is hyperkalemia present. Okay, if there is no hyperkalemia present and the patient's potassium is between 3.5 and 5, I don't even think about 5.5, I think about 5. I liberalize a little bit of their potassium, and I tell them, okay, how much you can have, and I do the calculations for them. So potassium is definitely individualized. It is not like, you can have it either liberally, or you can just stop it or restrict it, even if your potassium is high. Because there are patients who come to me who have kind of stopped all the fruits and vegetables because they want to control their potassium, and by stopping that, they also stop their fiber, they also stop their vitamins, minerals, and everything else. So we cannot do that, and they cannot afford to really lose on so many essential nutrients, just because they are trying to manage their potassium levels. So these potassium levels are individualized, they are based on their serum potassium levels. And the KDOK says that 2000 to 2500 mg per day could be used for potassium. So I'll just give you a little case scenario of how sometimes potassium levels could change with the different type of patients that you are using or that you're seeing. So if there's a patient with hyperkalemia recurrent, means he always has a problem with potassium, this thing, he's persistently high, his potassium reaches like 6.2, 6.8 very frequently, and whatever he tries, the potassium does not this thing, maybe once in a while he'll come with a report of say 5, of a potassium of 5, and then he thinks that probably I will give him a little more potassium in the food, but I know that he's got a trend of constant 6.2, 6.5, and we just want to bring it down. So such people, I will not give any liberal potassium intake. However, there would be another borderline potassium case where this guy would have say around 5.2 to 5.5 potassium. So, and what I would do for this patient is I would see the trend that okay, all this while his potassium has been say 4, 4.9, and today he's come for the very first time with 5.2. So I will take a history of his and I will see what was it that he consumed differently from the other days, which has increased his potassium to this level. So I will identify that particular food. Maybe he will tell me, oh, yes, I had something with a coconut or a coconut milk or a coconut water. Or usually they don't have coconut waters, but just for an example, or oh, I felt like eating a banana and that's why my potassium has increased. So I will try to look at various foods and then give them ways and means in which they can reduce their potassium, but I will not strictly tell him that oh no, high potassium foods at all. Then there's another case with when this patient, although we are trying to restrict potassium for other patients, this patient constantly comes with hypokalemia. Okay, and his potassiums are generally between 3.2 to 3.4. Why would I restrict a potassium content from the food of a patient who in the first place does not have a high potassium level, serum potassium level? So in this patient, I would say that okay, you can have, I may not give fruit juices or things that are directly potassium rich, but probably I would tell him you don't need to leach the vegetables, you don't need to restrict your low potassium gap foods. Then I also would want to highlight on, like as I said, one size does not fit all. So in three different cases, if you look at how I would give the diet, I would, in this case one, where this patient constantly struggling with potassium, I would strictly say no, no for banana, mango, coconut water. And sometimes I would even tell him to leach his fruits and vegetables. The second scenario, I would say that okay, you eat moderately, you eat a little, one bowl of papaya, or you can have say 100 grams of guava, you can have a little mixed vegetable pulao. The third case, I would say, right, you may have more than one, two fruits per day, sometimes three fruits per day. Okay, because you are hypokalemic and you don't need a great restriction. So here is where a renal dietitian really comes in play, because it's not like you give a diet once for all and that's for life. So this is the turning point. Coming to there's always been a question that has been asked to me, that if I cut my vegetables and I soak it in water and I follow all the ways and means in which you tell me to leach the fruits and or the vegetables, how much of potassium will it make a difference to, or how much of potassium will be lost? Now frankly, I do not have an answer to it. Yes, rough estimates are available, but I cannot be sure unless I get it lab checked, that okay, this much amount of potassium will be lost. However, with green leafy vegetables is why where sometimes if only for hyperkalemic patients, We restrict because the potassium here is bound to the intracellular, and it is tightly bound in the cell, so it is difficult to leach. However, you cut them very fine, slice it very fine, soak them in water. This is the process that I tell them how they have to do if you really want to follow a very scientific way of leaching potassium. Soak them for at least 2 hours. Some you can soak them for overnight, or use a little warm water. You can use approximately 10 parts of water to 1 part of vegetable. Drain the water, whether it's vegetable, dals, or any other foods that you want to bring the potassium down to. uh, Frankly, not all patients need this method of leaching the potassium, but for the scenario one where we are trying our best to reduce the potassium, that type of patients would need this type of leaching, but not for the scenario 3. And therefore, whilst you're giving an advice of potassium restriction, be very careful. What are you restricting? Whether you're restricting only potassium, or with the potassium you're restricting fiber, you're restricting micronutrients, you're restricting the vitamins, minerals, and everything else. So, how much of potassium is lost while leaching? Soaking alone, 1 to 2 or 2 to 12 hours, about 10 to 30%. You sometimes double cook it, throw away the excess water, peel, slice, soak. You lose 50%, 30%. So there is no sure shot of how much of potassium is actually lost. There are some studies which will give you some information, but frankly, if you really want to be sure, you'll have to send your food to the lab. Now, the other aspect where we always struggle with is phosphorus. So whilst we say dietary phosphorus, the target is 800 to 1000 mg per day, and you adjust according to the labs. Now, phosphorus is very tricky. I'll tell you why. Of course, phosphate binders are given, and they need to take phosphate binders along with their food. However, remember, phosphorus is available in two different kinds of this thing. One is the organic phosphorus. Okay, organic phosphorus you get from food, actual food. Okay, but there's other phosphorus which is the more dangerous one, which is the inorganic phosphorus. And what is the difference in the organic and the inorganic phosphorus is that the absorption, the bioavailability. Even in the organic phosphorus, the bioavailability of an organic phosphorus from, say, a vegetarian meal, or from a food that is plant based, is still less than 50% or around 50%. But from a non vegetarian food, it is about 70%, but 60 to 70%. But if you take phosphorus from, say, a Coke or from a food, it is 100%. So that is the bioavailability of an inorganic phosphorus. So whenever you are restricting phosphorus, the first thing that you need to restrict is the inorganic phosphorus and not the organic phosphorus. Reason being is, all foods that are rich in phosphorus are also rich in proteins. So, if you try to remove the phosphorus rich foods from the protein rich foods, you are automatically making the patient go towards sarcopenia and weight loss, because they will lose muscles 100%. So while this has to be balanced very well, that you whilst you're giving phosphorus restricted diet, it has to match with the labs, plus it has to match with the bioavailability of how much of phosphorus is available in your body. So one, we know that phosphorus is required for bone, it's required for heart, it's required for so many other processes in your body. These are some of the phosphorus restricted foods that you need to restrict, for your patients. Also, remember one thing: phosphorus, on the labels, it never directly tells you I this product has phosphorus. It will give you all roundabout things. So of course you can give non-vegetarian foods, you can give dals, pulses, and again soak it for a little while in water. You will lose some amount of phosphorus. So see the names for the phosphorus. So these are the 100% absorbable phosphoruses that you get, whether it is trisodium phosphate, sodium triphosphate, tetrasodium phosphate, phosphoric acid, monosodium phosphate. All these are different names for phosphorus, and these are the dangerous ones. So this will make you need even more phosphate binders, right? So the first thing that you need to throw in the trash is these phosphorus in the inorganic phosphorus foods. Okay, and take it with meals, not before or after meals, which will help to control the phosphorus in the food. So again, high phosphorus contains, okay, I have another 10-15 minutes, but I think I also have question and answer. So I'll just go through these a little more quickly. These are some of the foods that you need to limit for phosphorus. As I said, that micronutrients, the first thing that when you are taking a diet history of the patient, if you're doing a nutritional screening, whether you're a nurse, you're a doctor, you're a dietitian, if you're doing the screening of the patient, three main things that you have to ask for micronutrients besides the other micronutrients. One is vitamin D status. We know because of the kidney failure, the vitamin D, is because of erythropoietin and the other reasons. So whether they have taken adequate injectables or other adequate supplements there. Then the other one is B12, and the most important anti-inflammatory is omega 3. Most patients do not take adequate amount of omega 3. Either they are not eating fish, or they cannot have so much of flax seeds and walnuts that they're getting omega 3. So they are actually compromised on omega 3. So here is where something that you need to think about. I'll also very quickly talk about the special population, because we are there's always a confusion between AKI and CKD and dialysis and all that. So I'll just also run that through. Of course, this is the DASH eating plan for hypertension. Let me come to SLED. Okay, because and the reason why I put this in my presentation is because there are many people who ask me about SLED, that is the sustained low efficiency dialysis, which we are using in the ICU for certain patients. Basically, it's a hybrid form of dialysis where there is intermittent hemodialysis and CRRT, that is continuous renal replacement therapy. That is what it is. It is a 6 to 12 hour session, and it goes on because the patient needs a little different type of a dialysis. Also, there is a loss of amino acids, higher amount. So patients who are on SLED definitely need more amount of not only proteins but even trace elements, water soluble vitamins, electrolytes, that all need to be very closely monitored. So for a stable hemodialysis, 1.2 grams of uh, proteins per day. For SLED, it is 1.5 to 2 grams per kg per day, and CRRT can even go higher. Go through the KDOK guidelines. It very clearly will give you the difference between AKI with the dialysis, without dialysis, AKI on CKD, etc. So this is some of the other aspects of it. I rather use some time with the rest of you to take some questions. However, just want to highlight that AKI and CKD are you have to see whether in AKI the patient is on dialysis or not on dialysis. Based on that, the proteins and the requirements will be changing. This is AKI on CKD, not on dialysis, zero point 0.8 to 1 gram of proteins. AKI on CKD, who's catabolic, we need 1 to 1.2 grams of protein. AKI on CKD with intermittent hemodialysis will require 1.5 to 2 grams of proteins. AKI on SLEDGE will require 1.5 to 2 grams, and AKI on CRRT requires more. So this is how it goes. It is more closely monitored in the ICU. So that is an important aspect which you need to understand and know. Okay, so electrolytes are individualized. Don't assume always go by lab values. These are some of the books that the Academy of Nutritional Sciences has we have released it. This nutrition in transplant we are releasing in the ICNC conference. I hope many of you are attending that. This is for swallowing therapies. All these are available on Kindle, Amazon, and poti.com. If you need any of these and you cannot find it, please do get in touch with me. These are some of the ways in which you can get in touch with the Academy of Nutritional Sciences. Get in touch with me, and we do a lot of studying, lot of learning together, and lot of teaching. So I'll be very happy to answer some questions. I think there are some questions already in the chat box. So I thought, in let's discuss things and let's talk about it. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much,
Yes.
ma'am, for your presentation. We
Most welcome.
received a couple of questions during the session. I'll take them
Yeah.
up one by one.
Yeah.
Uh, so, Simran has asked, can kanji be given recommended to patients on dialysis or not?
So kanji is a carbohydrate, okay, which can be given to the patient on dialysis. It depends upon what you're making the kanji of, whether you're making it of rice or you're making it of some other millet. Usually, millet kanjis are high in potassium because the potassium gets leached in the kanji, right? And therefore, you can use a low potassium food to make the kanji. Only account for the fluid in it, and if you're adding any additives like sodium, lime, etc.
Yes, ma'am. Another question is Is L-carnitine always required during dialysis? Do we always need to give it to patients?
No, no, it's not necessary that you always give it to patients on dialysis, because it's not a this thing. Yes, if there is a deficiency in terms of food or getting it from the diet itself, then you give as a supplement. We do give dialysis friendly supplements to patients, and that has L-carnitine, it has choline, it has so many other micronutrients as well as amino acids. Those can be given to patients who are unable. As I said, if a person requires 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein, even normal people like you and me find it difficult to consume that much. So imagine a person who's on dialysis, or who's got nephrotoxicity, or who's got uremic symptoms. They may not feel like eating so much of food. Even we find it difficult. So those are the people whom we give an ONS which has got L-carnitine in it.
Dr. Khan has asked, it's a bigger question. Who are patients who are CTD along with diabetes, and how are we supposed to completely avoid bakery products in view of gluten for them? And also, many patients, CTD patients, complain of anorexia. And
Yes.
how are we supposed to manage these patients?
Yes, they do complain of anorexia. Yes, because one is because of the uremic and the creatinine being high and the bun being high. Also, they are not able to eat that much quantities. It is a challenge, and these patients require a lot of care and counseling, and explaining to them what to eat first. So where to completely avoid bakery products, I said one is that if their sodium is controlled, in terms of they are not eating highly salty foods, otherwise they can be given in small amounts, which can be portioned and given to them in terms of bakery products. But I know of people who will have like a bun maska every day, okay, who will have a khari biscuit every day in the evening, and who will have biscuits every day when they get up in the morning. So those kind of substitutes can be given. So what I do is we have recipes of, like a ragi chip, or a food like a khakra, which can be given instead of the bakery product. So we have a substitute for everything.
Yes. Uh, Dr. Agrawal has asked, a number of dialysis or even non-dialysis patients have persistent vomiting and or severe nausea, and as
Hmm.
such don't tolerate proteins well.
Yes. Yes,
How
I
do we
agree with
manage
you.
protein intake?
Yes, I agree that they do have these nausea and vomiting again because of the uremic, symptoms that they have. Nevertheless, what we do is we divide their meals into smaller meals. So instead of giving like them a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I tell them to have two breakfasts, two lunch, two evening snack, and two dinners. So we divide their meals into smaller units and drier foods which don't give so much of nausea, vomiting, and then spread their meals accordingly. And to reach their protein content, I give them protein first. So reach if I divide the meals into 6 meals per day and they need 60 grams of proteins, I divide it into 10 grams each. So I'll give them one egg, or I'll give them one bowl of curd. I'll give them one tukada of paneer. If they eat chicken, a little bit of chicken. So that's how I distribute it. Give them six proteins which will give 10 grams each.
We have another question here. What should be the dietary management on non-dilated days of patients?
Yes, yes. So even for the non-dialytic days, uh, so here is the most important thing is fluid. On the days that you're not dialyzed, the fluid intake has to be monitored and closely monitored. The other, nutrient that is really important to be managed is potassium. These are the two more important things. So even on the non dialysis day, you have to restrict these two very very strictly, because I usually tell them, just before you go for dialysis and you want to have something, you can have it at that time rather than having it post your dialysis.
Yes. Another question is nuts and seeds are rich in phosphate. How do we include them in our diet?
Yes, so nuts and seeds are not only rich in phosphorus, they are phosphates. They are also rich in potassium, and it cannot be eaten ad libitum. I mean, it cannot be just eaten in any amounts. It has to be restricted to say 20 to 30 grams per day. Whilst we restrict them if the potassium is high or the phosphorus is high. Secondly, it is organic phosphorus, but it is absorbed only 50% in the body. So it still can be given, but in a restricted amount. We cannot just overly give it.
Dr. Aisha has asked any suggestion for a patient who has underwent radical nephrectomy due to RCC and has hypertension with diabetes?
Yes. So here the important is to check the creatinine and the bun levels of the patient. Also, with the nephrectomy, if here you'll go strictly by the lab values. With hypertension, we will have to restrict sodium and salt content of the food, and because of diabetes, the glycemic index of the food needs to be checked. So we need to avoid all high glycemic index food and give low glycemic index foods.
Uh, Another question is what are the preferences, diet and lifestyle if the creatinine level is high but the potassium is normal?
Okay, so if the potassium is normal, we can give a potassium which is around 2000 2500 mg in the day. However, if the creatinine level is high, we'll need to check why the creatinine is high. It is just it's a byproduct of the muscle breakdown, right? So I have had patients who did not have a kidney problem, but they have had high creatinine levels, is because they are consuming foods that are high in proteins, and when it breaks down to a substance called creatine. Or people who are consuming creatine, they when they eat and then it is broken down or there is a muscle breakdown, it definitely forms creatinine, which is then removed by the kidneys. Now, when you find a patient who's got a high creatinine level, you have to also match it with the bun levels plus the EGFR, plus they have to undergo evaluation by a nephrologist, which will tell you at which stage of kidney this patient is. Based on all those evaluations, you have to give the lifestyle and dietary restrictions.
Another question here is there any role of RO water in treating CTD patients?
It's just the water. If it is given as RO water, also water is water. So it has to be just straight. The fluid important is the amount of fluid that you're taking, whether it's RO or not an RO.
Yes, ma'am. Um, Ma'am, there are a couple of questions. I'll just state a few more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In CTD patients that have low HB levels, what should be the dietary management to correct both HB levels, and which routes are recommended?
So we know that the HB levels are low because of the hormone erythropoietin, okay, and therefore, we also know that there is a deficiency because this thing of the iron insufficiency. So if there is a deficiency in iron, because of which the hemoglobin is low, then you need to give iron rich foods to the patient. And which fruits are recommended? So there is no fruit that is particularly rich in iron. However, iron rich foods can be given as a part of the mixed diet, like certain things like avoiding tea with food, adding lime to your food, they all increase the iron absorption in the diet.
Uh, can protein powder be added to meet the high biological value of protein requirement in vegetarian patients?
Yes, it can be definitely added. Only check the electrolytes of the protein powder and the additives, and we can give protein powders to these patients.
Because one common question that has come in right now is protein powder and the creatinine supplements safe in healthy adults?
Yes, it is safe if you do not have a kidney problem and you're taking proteins as per your body weight, and you have calculated for it. So if you are 60 kgs and you're taking about 60 to 80 grams of proteins, is fine.
And what are few of the protein powder supplements that are recommended, and is there any phosphorus or sodium in these supplements?
Yes, so we do get kidney friendly protein supplements in the market. Many pharma brands are available, very easily available. If you want some recommendations, maybe you can take my number and we can have a chat later on, though. But they are available. Now, only if the patient is having a kidney problem, then we restrict sodium and phosphorus for these patients with taking these protein powders. But if there is no kidney problem, then there is no need to restrict, or no, you can just give a polymeric supplement protein powder for these patients.
Okay. And I think one last question would be, what are the best fruits for CTD patients that are
So
recommended?
yeah, so all these while we were giving the gap fruits, like low potassium fruits. When we say we give guava, or we give pineapple, we give papaya. Nevertheless, even if you are using low potassium foods, like you're not using things like banana or mango or coconut water or coconut malai, these fruits are generally avoided or restricted for patients with CKD. And if the patient's potassium is in a good range, we give 1 to 2 fruits per day, no fruit juices. But if the patient is struggling to get themselves to a normal potassium levels, that's when we restrict the amount of potassium rich foods that we are giving.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think there is one more question regarding the creatinine and protein supplements itself.
Yeah. So it's not that only, protein supplements cause kidney disorders. It is not like this. It is people who have a kidney disorder need to think what proteins they are consuming, rather than doing it vice versa. So as long as you're accounting for the amount of proteins that you're eating, and you are doing it wisely, if you still have a doubt, I think the best person is to go is to a qualified nutritionist, not to a gym trainer, and take the explanation as to how much of protein you require.
I think, ma'am, that brings us to the end of the question answer session as well as the presentation for today.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so
ma'am,
much.
for coming on our platform.
Thank you. And I wish that most of you all join the Academy of Nutritional Sciences. I think if anybody is from Academy is there, they can put the,
Yes,
WhatsApp,
yes.
site or the number, so that if you all need any more queries or any more courses that need to be done in nutrition, we are open to take you all on board. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, once again.
Thank you. Thank you.